given how nascent the entire Web3 space is, it's still very much narrative driven. And I think it's important for us to always remain relevant. For DeFi protocol, the things that matter the most is, of course, like TVL's there, but not only that is volume. So if you're essentially a DeFi protocol that also allows swapping or trading, then volume is another important metric because it signals how much fees you're also able to generate and give back to your LP. This is one of the greatest strengths working in Web3 is because everything is verifiable, right? I can easily verify on-chain whether what you're saying is true or not.
In a startup environment, what's more important, speed or precision?
Speed, I would say, is more important because the space in itself moves already too fast. And if you miss out something, then you completely miss your shot, right? So if you're trying to perfect something, you'll never launch. So just launch something as fundamental and working as possible. And then you can always iterate from there, but do it in a responsible way. Maybe my advice to teams is that it's really difficult, especially with Web3 and crypto. It's really like fast moving. And sometimes you don't see results for like the first 2 years. But I think if you really believe in what you're doing, like you have purposeful innovation, you really want to aim for like something that creates real impact, and you just stick to your guns and have consistency and grit, I think later on it will pay off.
Hi, Anton. Thank you so much for joining Depesh and I on Innovate and Grow today. So Anton is the head of ecosystem at Pendle. And I think Pendle has done an incredible job of building market narrative around them this cycle. When I met Pao from Pendle a few weeks ago, I showed him a post that I created, I think it was 10 months ago, where I did a case study on how Pendle had grown. So I'm actually really excited to have this conversation. And so Anton's background is also that he was a former senior software engineer at Kyber Network, which also seems to have a bit of like the Kyber Network graduate program where everyone seems to do really well that comes out of Kyber. So I guess before we dive into it, I would love for you to just do a quick introduction on yourself.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me, Maddie and Depesh. I'm really glad to be here. And I guess, share more about Pendle and myself. So just a quick overview of my background. I've basically been in the Web3 crypto space for quite a while. I started off with Bitcoin in 2012. Basically kind of like found that out by reading this article about the Silk Road randomly when I was bored at work. I'm technical by background, so I graduated with a computer science degree, and my first job was working with oceanography, engineering or research. And back then it wasn't something that I was I had a lot of free time, so crypto was kind of like something I was dabbling on the side. And I think with that started my journey, getting to know Ethereum and then, joining different meetups. I think I was one of the first members joining the Singapore meetup, when Vitalik and Gavin was there teaching about Solidity. And from there, I met a couple of friends, right? So including those was Kian, who's our CEO at Pendle. And we just basically grew the circle and popping up ideas on what we could build. And I also through those meetups and connections met Loy, who is the founder of Kyber, and later on I came to join them as one of the software engineers and working on smart contracts as well. So I've been with Kyber for about 3.5 years, working mostly on the technical side and also doing developer relations, and that's kind of how I met Depesh here as well. I think it was initially through one of the hackathons, if I remember correctly. And I think when things were picking up. DeFi summer came around 2020, 21. There was basically an idea of doing Pendle. And, we had this close circle of friends, Tien and others. They went to start this off, and then I later on joined them to help build it. So that's kind of the long story short of what I my journey, I guess, leading to where I am right now. And I guess in Pendle, my primary role would be leading the growth of the ecosystem of Pendle, basically kind of on listings, for example, or integrations or, what have you. I think, for any startup out there, we wear multiple hats, and I basically started off doing more technical programming work. But since the team discovered that I was one of the devs that just talked too much, now I'm pushing to this business development role. So that's kind of how I do most of the talking, or I'm public facing now. As compared to the rest of the team. But yeah.
Thanks for that, telling it. So let's zoom in a little bit on Pendle, right? Would love to understand what's Pender's core value proposition?
Yeah, so I think the idea of Pendle started during DeFi summer or the last DeFi summer, where you basically had that boom of yield farming, right, or liquidity farming or liquidity mining, and you basically had all these different food coins. So when I say food coins, you had like basically Yam Finance, sashimi, sushis, or what have you, right? Where they had more than 10,000, 100,000 APYs. So really was an avenue to be able to hedge your risk against this high APYs. So, and like in traditional finance, the idea of an interest rate derivatives market where you can basically trade interest or yield is like it's one of the biggest verticals in traditional finance. And there really wasn't a product within Web3 which you could use to, or like a leverage that with the different like yield strategies or yield opportunities within DeFi. So that was the initial motivation behind starting Pendle, where we wanted to really bring that avenue, right? That primary avenue where you can express your opinion on the direction of yield and to develop strategies around that underlying yield volatility. So we have our currently deployed V2, which you can use to tokenize yield by splitting them into its yield and principal components. So what we call YT and PT. And you can trade them in its own separate market. And we also have this upcoming V3, which is another product that will exist complementary. So it will work in parallel to our V2, and of which you can do more with your yield. But of course, the main value prop of what Pendle's trying to do is that we want to be that main avenue where you can do more with yield itself.
So a question that's come into my mind, particularly when listening to different interviews that TN has done as well, Pendle has done an incredible job at jumping into different market narratives at the right time. So whether that's been points or E3 staking or now Bitcoin. How do you think about balancing jumping into the market narratives versus building your own narratives? Do you see it as a risk where you're always jumping into the next narrative? Or, what is your thought process behind that?
Right. So I think, given how nascent the entire Web3 space is, it's still very much narrative driven. And, like it's like this overall metagame that for like a certain period, the general community is focused on like certain core narratives. And, like certain narratives would be on the sidelines, but still developing. But there's kind of like this one overarching narrative that most people are focused on. And I think for us, it's always, it's important for us to always become like remain relevant with whatever ongoing narrative. And we could do this both ways, right? Where either we try to align Pendle with whatever ongoing narrative, or we try to develop the narrative itself. So one good example is when there was this lead up to the Chappelle upgrade in Ethereum. And with that, there was this explosion of liquid staking assets. Like you had Lido, you had Rocket Pool, you had Anchor, right? They had all their LSEs essentially. And for us, we were trying to find ways to be part of that as well, right? And I think that's kind of like where we got our initial traction when we started supporting those different LSDs, because again, with the Chappelle upgrade, it allowed people to kind of like withdraw their assets from those, liquid staking tokens that were kind of like where you were locked and you could not withdraw. You could only trade it or swap it out into ETH using a DEX, but now you can actually redeem the underlying staked asset or staked ETH with that upgrade, right? And so we were able to kind of like align ourselves well there. Now for restaking, and this is kind of like a big innovation that has been introduced by Eigenlayer. And we also wanted to be part of that because it was such a huge like ongoing narrative that, a lot of capital and development work that was being brought into it. And so we were trying to figure out a way to kind of like take part in it as well, right? And also kind of like enhance it. So because of those narratives, if you are a user and you are just following major narratives, let's say you're just looking to liquid staking tokens or restaking or even Bitcoin Fi, right? You would naturally fall upon Pendle in a way, because Pendle is now like part of that narrative. So for example, if you had an LRT like EtherFi, ETH, or like Puffer or whatever, and you wanted to do more with your restaking token, you would naturally bump into Pendle, because Pendle would be an avenue where you can do more with your asset. And that's just part and parcel because, you're initially just researching about restaking and you naturally fell upon like Pendle by accident because we were part of that narrative. So moving forward, I think this is kind of like where we used our own strengths to develop narratives further. So when Points came about, right? So Points basically was started by Blur, one of the founder of basically of Blast as well. but it wasn't as popular back then. And then came EigenLayer and then EtherFi with their point. So we were just thinking like, how do we get involved with points as well, right? Because points is essentially off chain, and there was really no like for how Pendle worked, right? It was mainly delving with or integrating with on chain yield, but points was completely off chain. So how do we reconcile this and make this work with our current protocol mechanics? And in a way, we were able to figure it out. Like, okay, why don't we just put all points into YTs, and then they will be like we could just take like reframe what points is. Like points is just another form of yield, and we can let people speculate on what that eventual yield would be with points. And I think we experimented with that, and somehow the market really liked that, and it blew up from there. So in a way, like Pendle became this amplifier around the points narrative, where I think I would say we wouldn't really fully take credit, but I think it's because of our efforts that it kind of like exploded, right? And I think it would be the same for BTC Fi, like this last one. And I
Yeah.
think that it definitely was struggling, but I think we are making huge bets with BTC. And that's why we're pushing a lot to make this narrative kind of like a big thing as well. So yeah.
How do you choose what narrative to jump into? Because there's a lot of noise, particularly on crypto Twitter. So how do you evaluate, okay, this is a solid narrative, this is a strategy we need to go with?
Yeah. So to be honest, we do a lot of experiments and a lot of those experiments fail. When we first launched our V2, we experimented with a lot of stuff, right? So we did definitely something with liquid staking tokens. And then we did something with ape coins because, Bored Apes were essentially still a big thing, like very popular, especially during that time when we first launched our V2. And we wanted to be part of that somehow, right? So we launched with that. And then we launched with Looks Rare because it was the NFT trading marketplace and it was producing yield as well. So we wanted to be part of this like, NFT trend of being able to trade your NFTs. Um, of course, like, those narratives did succeed as much as LSDs, but, like moving forward, currently you have things like AI, DePIN, we did also partake in those. Like for AI, we also supported the market. Um, but of course, like the traction did result to what we were aiming for. So maybe it was too early for us or we needed the market to catch up. But overall, right, any narrative out there, we will always try as long as it's able to produce some forward yield. We're able to tokenize it and create a market in Pendle. And if it's something that the market wants, then we will continue to support that. So the ones that you see right now in Pendle are consistently there because they have kind of like reached market or product market fit for the greater community. Yeah, like LRTs, for example.
Essentially, when it comes to experimenting and especially doing these narratives, right, the impact on Pendle is basically there are multiple ways to measure them, but eventually it boils down to one of the key metric, which is the TVL related stuff, right? So I'm just, extending this question on the narrative side because you did see a couple of narratives really blow up, and there was this huge influx in Pendle's TVL, and then there was this entire tweet about a particular date, which Pendle put out a particular date where we expect, unfortunately, a lot of these points or something to be expiring, and there might be a sort of a cliff, and there might the TVL might drop. Which is what happened, which also became the news. I think there was a Coindesk article that, at least, which I am not sure the others would have either taken that or kind of just reworded in a different fashion and circulated around. So, I mean, will that event question a Pendle that essentially, okay, are we going to go from narrative to narrative, or is there something else around there? And more from a I want to zoom out and talk about this question from any startup point of view, right? Any startup we found out there, is it particularly a narrative, or do you look for narrative in the meantime but try to build something else around
Yeah, for sure. And I think, given how Pendle has been like is designed, we have kind of like pros and cons with how it's currently designed, which is market expire, right? And the advantage here is that we can always experiment with different things, like different markets, different narratives, and we can set an expiry. Let's say this market just lasts for 6 months, and if it expires and it doesn't work out, then we can just kind of like leave that narrative and move on to the next one that can work, right? But this kind of like becomes a like I would say like a challenge for us because with the way like how Pendle works, when markets expire, we need to always have something interesting or attractive for users to want to come back, right? Because once they expire, they can redeem. And if it's not attractive anymore, they can just kind of like stay in the sidelines, right? So our challenge is always being able to put out markets that the users would want. So it's either we can consistently support the same markets that is giving traction, obviously, so people can come back and they can take part of that, or we have to introduce like no more like different markets or new narratives that they would want to partake in, and it's new and it's interesting for them. That's why they would want to come back. But overall, um, with those pros and cons, we have the advantage here to always experiment. And I think that's it will be cyclical in a way. But I think when you basically have core narratives that have developed and have proven its traction on Pendle, so I would say like the biggest ones right now are definitely like liquid staking tokens, liquid restaking. We also have the dollar pegged assets like Ethena and Usual. Those are basically the biggest ones in Pendle so far. And of course, like if there's others, like right now, Bitcoin is really growing like tremendously as a use case in Pendle. And if that becomes like consistent for us, then we will definitely support that from today and to the future, right? So yeah.
But related to this question, do you think TVL itself is the right metric for someone to evaluate any project? Because in that sense, as I understand, it's Pendle's core business is about creating markets, right? Creating markets where people will actually hedge or take some bets. In that case, it's the core business of Pendle. And then why is the TVL up and down really so much of a metric that someone should put so much of value to?
Right. I think TVL is definitely still important because the rest of the community still values it as a metric, right? So it's still an indicator of the health of a protocol. So the more TVL, then it's also a signal on the general interest of the community, right? They wouldn't really, let's say like a whale, right, wouldn't really put a large amount of money in a protocol where he doesn't really trust or there's not a lot of liquidity in, right? And let's say like for the markets within Pendle itself, like if you'd want to trade those PTs, YTs, but there's not enough liquidity there, not enough TVL basically, then you wouldn't be able to trade inside. So it's still in our interest to be able to attract large amounts of the TVL to be able to make those happen. But I think that comes down to the design of like V2 and our upcoming V3. So V3 would be a bit more different. But overall, I would say that for DeFi protocol, the things that matter the most is, of course, like TVLs there, but not only that is volume, right? So if you're especially a DeFi protocol that also allows swapping or trading, then volume is another important metric because this kind of like signals how much fees you're also able to generate and give back to your L. So I would say that there's a lot of factors, but TVL still is one of them for sure.
Kind of done a little bit up and down on the question but since you're talking about V3, there's one question that we had. Can you tell us more about the V3? I mean, you've kind of kept it cryptic. Is there more that we can dive into?
Yeah. So to be honest, I really can't share much right now because it's still heavy in development. In fact, as I speak right now, most of the smart contracts are still being written and developed, right? But what I can say is that it will not completely replace our V2. In fact, when we launch and announce our V3, right, we won't even call it V3 at all. So it will be like it's like you can just say like a public name like V3, right? But I think the motivation around V3 is this. In traditional finance, you're able to trade this interest rates in size, right? Like it's in the trillions of dollars. And they come from like a different like markets, like, there's the LIBOR rate, there's mortgages, there's the TradFi bonds, basically anything that produces yield, you're able to trade the interest rate in some form, like get either a fixed yield or gain exposure to the floating yield itself. Now in Pendle, the current V2 deployment, you are capped with the amount of available liquidity in the AMM itself. So let's just say you are a big firm and you would want to be able to get a fixed rate on the size of, let's say, 500 million or like $1 billion, right? That is completely impossible because if there's not enough liquidity in the AMM, and depending on like how the AMM model works, then you wouldn't be able to do that, right? And that kind of like goes in parcel with the liquidity on DEXs as well. So let's just say you'd want to get a large fixed rate position for some PT BTC, right? But before you can do that, you need to actually swap your stables, let's say to BTC. So that's kind of like another area of liquidity that's needed for DEXs. And then from BTC, you need to swap it into the fixed rate version or PT BTC on Pendle. And that's also another layer of liquidity that's needed. So with that, I think with V3, we can do this more, but with size, right? But I won't reveal yet how exactly we'll be able to do this. But now you can basically long or short yield, but with size with V3. And news around that and details around that is definitely slated to be announced later. Like we're aiming definitely like in the next few months. So I would say like yeah, like let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I will
Yeah.
not dig too much. Yeah.
I think that's as much as Anton's going to give away. One thing that I did want to touch on, and I think that Pendle has done incredibly well, is you've kept a very lean team, but still at the same time growing and scaling Pendle really well in terms of TVL and adoption. What is your philosophy around building and growing your team? And how have you managed to keep it so lean when there's so many projects in crypto that overhire and then have to go on the massive firing spree?
Yeah, I think, for us, especially when we were growing, maybe just to back up a bit, Pendle has been live since 2021. And, the early 2 years of Pendle, I would say like 2021, 22, even in the, like around 2023, the early innings as well, we were struggling for sure. Like nobody knew about Pendle and we needed to um, put a lot more effort to make ourselves known and get that product market fit. And I think, com- comes with that being able to hire good people to help us out in growing this, protocol. And how we approach this is that we are very selective when it comes to hiring. Now, I think one struggle that we have within Singapore is that since it is a big crypto hub, we have many different startups fighting over the same small pool of applicants. So we needed to kind of like in a like a kind of like be more creative around there and find talent like outside of that small pool, especially since they're quite expensive, right? So what we did is, most of our hires are actually from referrals. So if we recognize, like, some of our teammates are definitely very talented, and if they had other talented friends that they can refer, then we definitely like, approach them. And these people do not necessarily have any crypto experience. In fact, I would say that a majority of our new hires have absolutely no crypto experience at all, right? And it would be kind of like the senior's job, like my job, to be able to onboard these guys and teach them about DeFi, crypto, how block explorers work, and just get them through the journey, right? But as long as that they have that core competency of being able to produce results, then it's good for everyone. Yeah. So yeah, I think it just comes down to where you can find talent, and I think the Web 2 pool is still big enough for us to be able to onboard that, and I think we just did incredibly well there in finding the right people. Yeah.
This is something that I often battle with, particularly around Web3 recruitment, because there is a limited amount of people within crypto and Web3. And it's often a balancing act of, do you get someone that is like understands crypto really well, is really good for the role, or someone that's maybe a bit like has the character and the skill set, but doesn't have the crypto knowledge, and then spend the time training them up. How do you think of balancing that in terms of like the time spent with onboarding new employees that are new into crypto?
Yeah. So I think if you find the right person and this person can learn fast, especially if he can learn by himself, then you've got the right guy, right? You just basically have to show him the ropes, like give him resources and take him through some initial courses or modules. Like I would be doing all that onboarding and make sure that they know all the kind of like core bits of knowledge that they need to kind of like get from okay, I have like a high level knowledge, and then if I need to dig in more, then I can do it myself. Then that's kind of like that's the most ideal situation for us, right? Because for that person, like he's basically going through this journey where he's learning for himself and also needing to produce or he needs to work, right, and produce results within Pendle. So, and within Pendle as well, right, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of markets that we're working with, different protocol partners, and that's kind of like part of their learning process because they get exposed to many different protocols that have different like schemes or mechanics. And from there comes more questions, right? Like, maybe there's a term that was mentioned and they didn't understand that. Like, let's say the term like AVS, for example. Maybe if you're completely out of crypto, that is a very alienating word. But I think from that can be a conversation where we teach them about the idea of an AVS, and then they ask more questions around that. Like, okay, I know what AVS is. Why do they need validation? Then we explain to them about ETH staking, and then they ask about, oh, what is proof of stake? So we basically have an environment where anyone can ask questions, no matter how dumb they are. And we have an environment that is safe enough that we can answer like any question out there, and we just help each other grow. So it really comes down to just having an environment where you have newcomers who really have no idea about anything, and just help them grow for all. And in the end, even with that time invested, they will produce results. So yeah, and there will always be a net positive to the Web3 space as well. So it's about introducing like as much good you can into this space, and yeah, they'll produce results. So I think this is one thing that Kyber did really well. Like under Victor and Loy, they were able to grow like a team that has high integrity, like high principled, and Kyber would be their first like foray into crypto, right? But later on, when they've been more experienced and they leave, they're able to start their own thing, and then from there it becomes like much more influential. And we do have alumni from Kyber that were able to do such things. Yeah.
I work quite closely with Sasha, who was the head of growth at Kyber. And because Kyber, I think, was her first proper entry point into crypto and Web3. But she's one of those people where like she's almost a bit of a gun, and she just like gets so much shit done. And I actually have a lot of admiration for what Kyber have done in the sense of like the people that they've hired. What do you think was their secret? How do you think Kyber has built such a strong alumni network?
I think it's all about support, right? So we have this alumni Telegram group where we can all still get connected. And if anyone is kind of like cooking anything up and you needed any form of support, there's the team that will be able to do that. So yeah, like whether it be connections or even raising capital, they'll be able to leverage that network or that alumni network, right? So, but it all comes down to like we basically have this group of people that are high principle, because we want to work with people with high integrity and with a lot of like values. And I think as long as they're able to show that, then it's easy for them to work with others as well, because um, it's kind of like always net positive overall for the space if you can work with us such people, right? Because again, the space has so much noise. So the more serious builders that we have, then it's good for everyone overall.
Talking about noise, I have one very important question. So are we going to see a Pendle chain like Unichain?
Right. So yeah, I mean, like there was a big announcement of from Uniswap, right, the Uni chain. And to be honest, this idea has definitely been suggested to us as well, and it's been floated around like, hey, why doesn't Pendle like do their own chain? It would make sense, right? So personally, I understand the motivation behind the app chain thesis. I think it was a thesis that was kind of like formulated way back, right? Like maybe since the early innings of Cosmos, right? Because Cosmos, that's kind of like one of their primary motivation, where each chain will be its own app chain. And the motivation around that is that for an app, you can basically own the entire stack, or have more control over your whole environment. So like, for example, where these fees go to, how fast your chain how do you want to be, like what trade-offs you'd like to implement, those things, the app has more control. But I think a lot of protocols as well underestimate how difficult it is to bootstrap and run your own chain, right? Imagine all the infra that you need to be able to run it, like, block explorers, RPC providers, indexers, all this infra, right? And if there's so much chains out there fighting for different service providers over like this different infra, it becomes extremely expensive, very competitive. So the only way for these to survive is to raise as much capital as they can, which we see right now, right? And those who are highly capitalized will be the ones that will only survive. Of course, like, unless they're like very hyped. But yeah, like it's not easy. I think, for Uniswap, they could definitely pull it off because they're such a big brand and they have such large amount of capital and like backers behind them. But I don't think that Pendle is at that level yet as Uniswap. So if we would pull off the same thing, I don't think we'll be as impactful, maybe. And it might not be even a good move for us, right? So I think for us, the most impact we can get is still our core proposition, which is, to be in chain ecosystems that have yield, or produce some form of yield and to be able to offer this Pendle service for them to leverage from. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I thought, I mean, I understand, acknowledge that running a chain is difficult, but I guess with now the OP hack and rollup as a service, which is they're not, Unichain itself is not too far from using rollup as a service. I know they've not gone ahead and used Conduit or the likes, but with Conduit existing, it sort of now is just a couple of clicks, right? As they put it on their website, 10
Sure.
minutes and have your own app chain up and running.
I think it's also the execution is difficult though, because I think with a chain, I always say it's like a marketplace on steroids because there's so many different components you need to manage, particularly around onboarding builders, like onboarding retail, managing the investor side. Like there's just a lot of different moving components to it. And I think the difficulty with new chains will just lie within the distribution, I think, moving forward, because it's becoming easier and easier to launch new chains. But whether you can execute that well is another thing.
Yeah. And I think that the friction is definitely still there. So we definitely have it easier to deploy all these different chains. But for users to be able to use the different chains, the friction is still there. Like there's not an abstracted way to get your liquidity from one point to another, like easily, right? And I think even for DeFi protocols, there is this fragmentation of liquidity as well that they would be struggling with. Because overall, right? So even though you're part of that super chain, you're still belonging to a cluster of chains, which is just, the op stack, right? But you're kind of like isolated from the ZK chain side, the others that may be from the Arbitrum side as well. So unless there's like a universal way to be able to synchronously talk with other chains and to be able to do like, one TX across, different chains and fragmented, like liquidity isn't as fragmented, then that's probably what it makes sense. But right now, I think there's still a lot of friction, especially to the end user.
Okay, I'm going to ask you an interesting question now. What do you think has been the biggest mistake you've made at Pendle?
Wow. This one I had to think. I mean, like on a personal or like Pendle as a whole?
On a personal, probably.
Oh, personal. Okay. I think that, with how Pendle works, right? We talk to a lot of protocols and we get exposed to many different narratives and yeah. And also, like for example, we are also approached by many chains to deploy there. So given how there's a lot of effort that's needed to be able to do a listing on Pendle and to be able to deploy Pendle as well on other chains, right? So there will always be misses, meaning that there could be instances where we miss a narrative, miss a certain like market, like we've overlooked it, but people have been clamoring like, hey, why isn't this there? And they actually do very well. Or we miss out like deploying on a chain ecosystem because we weren't as like maybe bullish on it, right? Because we do have to be selective, but we don't know what the outcome is, right? Like whether they would do well or not. So I wouldn't say that we did have like big misses, like for me, right? Like talking to these protocols where like maybe I personally pull it off, but I think what really works well with Pendle is that I myself cannot do like the decision making for everything. Like it will always be coming through team consensus. I think it would be the same way like for any of the heads like TN as well. It would be always like a team consensus on like the direction that we want to go. So I can, for example, suggest that, hey, this protocol or this like upcoming L2, it's great that we would deploy that because I'm very bullish on it, right? But the team might have like other opinions on it. So and it could be the other way, right? Like, the team has like another opinion on this, like, but I'm bearish on it. Like, I don't like this. And then that would result to a miss, because it would be my fault that I had voted against it, kind of like that. So maybe I wouldn't reveal like such like specific instances, but that would be like a more concrete case of hit and misses, I would say. Yeah.
Talking about this practice, where the team sort of unanimously takes decision, what would you advise, any particular golden tips to founders out there, and specifically Web3 founders, which, like these are the practices that you should follow to build a Web3 startup, and probably these are the practices that you must avoid, but they're highly lucrative and probably spare every second person telling you to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the Pendle team has been known to, or has been recognized, right, to like have a lot of success. And to be honest, like that success has only been realized early this year. So I don't think that we've like earned that title yet. I think that we still have a lot to prove. And I think that's why we have this meme, right, where job's not done, that we need to still continue working hard to set us apart from the space. But beyond that, I think that we do have core principles that help us push forward. So, for example, one of the things that we always highlight internally is this unyielding integrity, meaning that we always hold ourselves to the highest standards, no shortcut, no cheating, right? So let's just say that we do get offers of our, or maybe like backhand deals to be able to do this. If we feel that it's wrong, then we won't do it, you know? So and I think that also comes down to like within the team as well. So we have this, what we practice as well is what we call radical candor, meaning that we'll always be honest and truthful with each other within the team, always, right? So if we think that somebody's doing a bad job, we'll always give him that like feedback, but we'll always do it in a very constructive way as possible, but as like as candid as possible. So because overall, right, the team is like a lot of the team members has been in the space for a long time and they're exposed to multiple things and they also form their own opinions, right? So we do have dissenting opinions on certain topics, for example. But I think that as long as we come to a unanimous decision, despite the fact that some members disagree on it, we need to, like as a team, we still need to move forward towards this direction. And I think that we do have that alignment, and that it's very encouraging as well, right? Like despite the fact that there are dissenting opinions, if we have come into decision, everyone supports that decision, and that's why we're able to push forward with this. So it might not result to like the ideal result if it doesn't, but at least we all support each other there. So I would say that maybe my advice to teams is that um, it's really difficult, especially with Web3 and crypto. It's really like fast moving, and sometimes you don't see results for like the first 2 years. In fact, you might be, uh, you know, you may be called like unsavory things as well, like as a project, right? Given how toxic the space is, right? And there's a lot of noise. But I think if you really believe in what you're doing, like you have purposeful innovation, you really want to aim for like something that creates real impact, and you just stick to your guns and have consistency and grit, I think later on it will pay off. And that was the story for us, right? For the first 2 years, we were unknown, like nobody knew us. And for some reason, like after all that hard work, we were able to reap the benefit of it. So I think that comes down to other projects as well. Like I've seen a lot of projects that have gone through the story. So yeah, we've seen like the space, right? There's a lot of noise. So those who have taken shortcuts, like in a way cheated their community over something, like either like giving the team themselves like a lot of incentives or tokens, or like you just feel wronged as a community member. Those are the ones that do not last long, right? So this is something that we always kind of like emphasize internally with the team as well. Yeah.
I mean, is this okay? Then I'm gonna put you this one on the stand over there, right? Because and this is not specific to Web3. It also applies to just startups in every particular industry, Web2, non-tech also. Right? Every startup is sort of, or at least founding team is somewhere compelled to put up high growth metrics for a lot of reasons. And one of them obviously being able to impress probably the investors and probably being much more capable for raising the next round. And then zooming in on clearly Web3, you find a lot of these, suddenly you'll find on Twitter, and it's buzzing, and it's the talk of the crypto Twitter, that certain applications are minting a lot of money, there's high revenue, high users and all the thing. And then at the same time, fortunately or unfortunately, there are some reports which will try to bust that, saying that these are not true numbers. And then comparing that with the overall Web3 industry size, where people say, okay, are we just building a product for the next 2 users or 5 users, like a joke that's floating around? And so the question is, do you think that applications are just putting out fake or numbers which may be legit, but from one perspective, but not from a really hard metal test perspective.
Right. So I would say that this is one of the greatest strengths working in Web3 is because everything is verifiable, right? So whatever kind of like BS you put out, like, oh, we have a lot of users, we have a lot of TVL, whatever, I can easily verify on chain whether what you're saying is true or not. So imagine in Web2, right? There's this new PayPal competitor called WalletX, and they say like, oh, we have more users than PayPal. We have a lot of bank partners. For you as an end user, it's hard for you to verify. But for in Web3, you can be your own, like, like Web3 sleuth, do your own investigation, put out a Twitter thread. And then if people call out like whatever you're tweeting, right, people can also verify what you're saying is real or not, right? Like, oh, you're calling out like, BS because, this and that. But if what you're saying is true and people can verify that what you're saying is indeed true, then that's kind of like, that, this project is doing something wrong, right? So I think that's the beauty of it, right? Like we can build in pretty much an open and permissionless uh, environment, although it's like highly adversarial, but we can keep each other in within checks and balances. So I think, yeah, like it's part of it. Like this project, they can play the game. They can put out like, okay, I have this high numbers, whatever. They can frame it in a certain way, but if the community like calls you BS, then that's on you.
That's true. That's true. That's true. That's fair enough. Yeah.
What growth metrics do you think, particularly DeFi protocols, should actually be focused on? Because there is a lot of noise. What do you think are the metrics that matter?
So there's definitely a couple things that we look at, which is retention of users, like the number of wallets that come to us and actually use Pendle. And we do kind of like try to identify like which ones are the power users, like those who have a lot of capital, and those who like what we call retail, where they don't have a lot of capital but they use it. So we want to attract both, right? Like both the power users and retail as well. And TVL is always like another metric to be able to detect this because both retail and power users, like power users include like funds or big whales, for example, that put into your protocol because they trust and know that your protocol is secure. So that's kind of like an area like that can be used as a signal, but also trading volume, right? Trading volume is an indication that people are actually trading the yield for us. So there is like this strong use case that the yield is volatile enough that people can develop strategies. So or for example, if there's somebody like buying fixed yield, then we know that there's high volume because somebody's trying to acquire in size this fixed yield asset. So maybe I could probably summarize into those three main things that we look for, which is still, for any DeFi protocol, TVL is very important. It's an indication of like a healthy liquidity in the protocol. Trading volume, because it's an indication of being able to generate fees and activity. And then, of course, like users, because it doesn't matter if you have 2 users that's doing maybe $1 billion worth of volume on your protocol, but it's just 2 users. So what impact do you have there? So we definitely have to attract as much users as much as possible, right? Because the space in itself is big, right? When I was going through Token 249 week, I was, trying to like get my heads on the GameFi space, for example, or like Deepin. And most of them actually do not know what Pendle does. So they're not exposed there. So there is this addressable market that we have not penetrated that is still within crypto, but have not done anything much in DeFi because they're in kind of like a completely separate like interest group. So I think we still have our work cut out for ourselves. And I think if we are able to penetrate that mind share and be kind of like this relevant brand within all of crypto, then yeah, then I think that we've done our job well. So maybe like Aave, right? Like I think almost everyone knows who Aave is. Yeah. So hopefully we get to that point. Yeah.
What is the plan or the strategy, let's say, over the next 12 months, particularly on the growth side, to be able to acquire more of those users?
Yeah, so it's still a big push on education. So this comes with the ongoing narratives that we have, and the top and foremost one is BTC-Fi, or with doing something with bitcoins, and of course working on the launch of our V3. So this is slated for sometime early Q1 next year, so either January or Feb. So hopefully we get that out then. And I would say that the majority of our resources has been put into those. So in the next, leading up to the end of the year, in the next few weeks or so, most of our listings will be focused on a lot of BTC-Fi stuff. But of course, we'll be supporting like other markets as well, like what other upcoming markets. But yeah, those will be the primary focuses. And if there's something that pops up, then we'll be sure to be, one of those that will be leveraging that in a way. Yeah.
Okay. We're now going to jump into a quick fire round of questions. So the goal is to keep the pace of these questions just very quick and for you to almost respond with the first thing that comes into your mind. So are you ready, Anton?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, question number 1. What is the most overhyped crypto trend right now?
Crap. That's really hard then. Yeah. Okay, the first thing that popped into my mind is, but to be honest, it's kind of like slowing down a bit. It's definitely points because it has been hyped up a lot. But I think people are recognizing the downsides of points. So, but yeah, I would say that that's the one that has been hyped up a lot, like in terms of this current metagame. Yeah.
If you could only hold one asset for the next 10 years, what asset would you hold?
Can I mention 2 or 3
Yeah,
actually?
we can do 2.
Yeah.
We can do
Okay.
3.
Okay. Bitcoin for sure, because it's been there like since the beginning of the
Yeah.
Web3 times, Ethereum, because I'm always like an ETH bull.
Yeah.
And of course, Pendle, because I have strong belief in what we're doing.
Last question. In a startup environment, what's more important, speed or precision, and why?
I would say that speed is still important, and maybe I can justify why.
Yeah.
Because the space in itself, right, moves already too fast. And if you miss out something, then you completely miss your shot, right? So I think that you if you're trying to perfect something, you'll never launch. So I would say that, just launch something like as fundamental and working as possible. And then you can always iterate from there. So, in the same kind of like software engineering standpoint in like Silicon Valley, where you can just launch fast and then break things and then, just iterate and fix things. But of course, like, don't break things like significantly in Web3, because if then people lose funds. But at least, do it in a responsible way, but still like a launch, right? Because I think your ideas might be invalidated really quickly when you launch fast, and then you can learn from there and then iterate even faster. So speed, I would say, is still more important.
Agree. Depesh, would you agree with speed as well?
Would I go? Yes, absolutely. Speed.
Yeah, I think so too. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anton. What is the best way for people to support yourself and also Pendle?
Yes, sure. So, of course, come join our Discord group. We also have a Telegram group as well, but we have both of those links in our site, which is pendle.finance. You can find me on Twitter, although I'm not very active, to be honest. I'm more of a lurker, and I just retweet or lurk on stuff. But my handle is AYO Buena Vista. So yeah, I have a Spanish name, but yeah, that maybe we can share those links later on. And yeah, but if you join our Discord group, you can find me there anyways. So we'd look forward to having you guys, especially if you have any opinions on what type of narratives that we can support or what type of markets you're interested with. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining Depesh and I, Anton.
Likewise, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.